Good day. Today we're going to be discussing a very important topic. We're going to be talking about COVID SARS-2. And I'm going to try to take my time, and I'm going to try to speak slowly because usually I'm usually speaking very quickly, because I think that the information that I'm about to share with you could impact your life and maybe perhaps could save someone else's life. So we're going to enter into this interesting phenomena that has taken the world by storm and has changed everybody's lives, and it's given us new vocabulary words like 6 feet and novel and masks, and everybody's talking about all of these things and the new normal, and perhaps find what may be God's way, what God would have us to do, because even though everybody seems to be running scared almost, God is still on his throne. And if he's still on his throne, that means he's still in charge. And if he's still in charge, then everything is okay, even in the midst of a pandemic. Let's pray though, because I need his presence to help me as I go through this. Lord, once again, I'm about to present to your people something that is very, very important. Everybody needs to understand your way, your will, and what these things really mean. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of ignorance. But we know that you would have your children know what is truth. And so we pray, O Lord, that the Spirit of truth will come now and guide us into it as you have promised. And we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. So once again, we're going to be talking about COVID. Now, we want to deal with health holistically. I am not a herbalist. I am not going to give you just herbs to treat any disease. I am here to tell you about God's whole plan to make you well. Health is not partial. It involves the whole body, emotional, mental, physical, even COVID. And I'm going to prove it to you as we go through the slides. Now, the 8 laws of health that are here have been put into the acronym vaccines by Dr. Thomas Jackson of Meat Ministry. And I liked it, so I copied it and I borrowed it for the purpose of this. So we have the 8 laws of health being vital trust, always temperate, clean water, correct breathing, invaluable rest, nutrition, exercise, sunshine. I call them the 8 doctors. And as long as we are always going to the 8 doctors, we're going to be fine. Now, before I go any farther, I want to tell you that COVID is best treated early. So if you've been diagnosed with COVID, if you have symptoms but you haven't been diagnosed with COVID, you need to do something early. If you're old or you know somebody that is old that has symptoms of COVID or has been diagnosed with COVID, you need to do something right away, especially for the elderly, because their innate immune system is not as good as it was when they were younger, and that's just the natural decline of vitality. But even if you didn't treat it early and you have pneumonia, or you know somebody that isn't breathing well and is really having a rough time with it, just remember that God was able to help the woman that had spent all that she had and had finished everything, and it was at the end of her rope when she just touched the hem of his garment. As far as I understand, the hem of his garment is still available today. So let's try to touch it as we go through this presentation. Now, there are 3 things that will affect how you respond to COVID when you get it. 3 things. And I'm not going to be able to go through all the scientific information. Most of them are available on the slides. If you read it, you check it, you Google it. But I am going to go through some of it. And what I want you to know is that anxiety, fear, and stress kills. In this case, it's destroying your immune system. 49% of adults have said that since COVID-19 occurred, They are depressed. 49% of parents have had to carry their children to a therapist or a psychologist or to a school counselor or to granny or to somebody because children are depressed. Things have changed. We're now living in a masked society, and we're going to talk about that. We are now living in a society where children can't go to school. We're now living in a place where some people are pro-vax, some people are anti-vax, where people who were friends are now divided over vax, which is interesting. But we're living in a time of fear. People are afraid of other people. You know, I was in the supermarket in Matthias, and then I was in, what do you call that one? Not Sings. I was in Brighton's, and I was just walking in the store, and somebody saw me, and they literally dressed back, let's keep the 6 feet distance. People are scared of you. If you sneeze or cough, everybody's looking at you like, does he or she have it? And so right now we're living in a strange society, and this has impacted our health very, very significantly. It has been proven that even for a test, so if we're preparing for a CXE, or if we're preparing for common entrance, or if we're preparing for any of the tests along the way, even for a 3-day exam, it has been proven that our immune system and the natural killer cells and the T cells, which we're talking both about the innate and the adaptive immunity, they are severely impacted so that they're not able to fight against disease as they should. So if right now you're stressed, in a fear, in anxiety, whether it's real or imaginary, it doesn't really matter, your body is not able to fight off disease as it should. And for COVID, this is going to matter whether or not you get 1 day COVID symptoms, no COVID symptoms at all, 3 days, 2 weeks, or if you wind up in the hospital. It's going to matter. The next thing that matters in terms of how we handle COVID, besides stress, is sugar. Sugar effect on the health is amazing, and we are consuming sugar in larger and larger amounts. As soon as you take sugar, 15 minutes later, 95% of your immunity is basically drunk. And I mean that pretty much as I say it, because if you look at the white blood cells under a microscope, they're moving as a man that is staggering, who's drunk too much. And so they're drunk, and over the next 2 hours, they fight to regain their ability to protect you. But for the next 24 to 48 hours, they're only able to operate at 50% capacity. And so sugar in any level severely affects the immune system. So if you're stressed and you're on a sugary diet, you're going to have a hard time dealing with COVID. And if you think that it's a lot of sugar and you just got to be spooning it in, no. If you're just having a 12-ounce soda, Sprite, Coca-Cola, then you're having about 12 teaspoons of sugar. If you have 1 tablespoon of ketchup, 1 teaspoon of sugar. Sugar is hidden in foods everywhere. And it's very easy for us to consume it without even knowing or thinking about it. And if we do, it's severely affecting our immune system. The other thing that we're going to talk about, which is the third, so we spoke about stress, then we talked about sugar. Now we're going to talk about sleep deprivation. If you're not sleeping, and you should be in bed by 9:30, and you should have 7 to 9 hours sleep per day. And for elderly people, even more. And for children, even more. But if you're not sleeping, your antibody levels are not going to work the way they should. Your natural killer cells, your phagocytes are not going to work the way they should. So as we go to the screen, I'm just going to read the last paragraph. So sleep loss is also related to a higher risk of infection. Restricting sleep to 4 hours per night for 6 days, followed by sleep for 12 hours per night for 7 days. So if you're trying to catch up, I know a lot of us don't sleep and then we try to catch up. So this person was trying to catch up. But still, it resulted in a greater than 50% decrease in the production of antibodies after the influenza vaccines. And that's just basically being after infected by a virus. So after being infected by a virus, if you haven't been sleeping, or even if a week before you haven't been sleeping right, but now you're sleeping right, it's significantly going to impact how you deal with COVID. And so for every person that I've spoken to that have had COVID for more than a week, 2 weeks, all of them have told me that they were either sleep deprived, they were either stressed, or they were either on high sugary diets, or they were all three. And this has significantly affected their body to handle it. And so they've had more of a rough time with COVID. So please remember that. Get your sleep. Don't stress. And stay away from sugar. What is disease? How should we respond? So we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to write this on the board because I have to. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that are the result of the violation of the laws of health. Now, if I was to pause here and ask you a question, whether disease is bad or good, I already know, because I've done enough of these presentations to know, that most of you will tell me that disease is bad. And I can agree that disease makes you feel bad. But disease of itself is not bad, according to this definition. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system. So that would say that a disease is actually trying to free your system from something. Exactly. And so the disease process is always trying to help you. I want you to remember this as we go through. So even some of you that have COVID and you've gotten a fever and you're scared because you've had a fever for 7 days, it's okay. Fever is your friend. And as long as your fever doesn't go over 105 into 106, you're okay. Because when your body raises the temperature in a fever, what happens is that that temperature rise signals to your body that, one, there needs to be more white blood cells in the blood. And immediately, your body starts producing extreme amounts of white blood cells. It also does other things, like increases chemotaxis. Chemotaxis is your body's ability for a white blood cell to find and identify a germ. So when you see something gets hot, it's not a bad thing. It's the body simply utilizing a system of heat increase to increase all the soldiers in your body so that they can protect you. So we want to remember that as we look at how the world has handled COVID and how the world is responding. So the first thing we can say is that the world responded by fear. And just so you know, one of my number one recommendations for COVID is turn off your TV, turn off your radio. Just so you know, number one. The reason for this is that if you keep listening to the continued bombardment, another 200 cases, one other person has died, 500 cases, 200 persons have died, just know that all that is going to be doing to your mind is putting you in a state of anxiety, fear, worry, concern, which, by the way, is highly unnecessary. Now, if you take the number of deaths in Guyana, and please feel free to do this, the number of deaths in Guyana, and by the way, this is in Guyana, America, and anywhere else, and you put it over the population, so how much ever people are in your population, and you multiply it by 100, you're going to get the percentage deaths that have occurred in Guyana, in America, or around the world. And what you're going to find, and by the way, I've done this with several numbers in several countries, is that the death rate of coronavirus is just about 0.1%. 0.1%, even though we don't want anybody to die from anything. But statistically, in the idea of disease and death in the world, is not very significant. Really, COVID, SARS-2, is not even a medical pandemic. I say that because in the 1918 flu pandemic, 50 to 100 million people died in 1 year. So far, in the 2 years that novel coronavirus has been out, 4 million and somewhat people have died. There is no comparison, and as such, this is not and cannot be called a medical pandemic. However, people are dying and some people are getting sick, and we want to know what we can do. But one of the things that we should not be doing is being afraid, because being afraid causes stress. Stress lowers immunity. A lowered immunity means that you can't fight off COVID the way you should. What else is the world telling us besides fear? It's telling us to sanitize. And if you've gone into anywhere in Guyana over the last, it's gotten worse in 2021, then everywhere you turn, there's sanitizer, sanitize, spray it, spray it, spray, wash your hands. If you're trying to move, if you move too fast, the guys say wash your hands. Some people are sanitizing. I see them coming with their own sanitizer basket, spray down, then they hold it. I saw people, some people, the other day my brother gave a lady money and she actually dropped the money in chlorine with tongs, then picked up the money because the money has COVID. And it's true, money has COVID. We're going to talk about viruses and how impossible it is to isolate from them, hide from them, or any other thing from them, because it's just not possible. But before we get into that, let's continue to talk about sanitization, and I'm going to read from the slide in front of me. It says, just about from the part that says, a study evaluating the hands of healthcare workers found those with less microbial diversity were more likely to harbor pathogenic microorganisms on the hands. They were more likely to harbor pathogenic microorganisms on the hands. So what does that mean? Healthcare workers had less, you call it the hand microbiome. And yes, it's a thing, just ask Google. And if you kill the microbiome on your hand, and that means, just let me tell you, there are trillions of viruses on you right now. So just look at yourself and just know that even though you can't see them, they're there. Trillions of viruses. In fact, there are 10 times more viruses than there are bacteria on you, but there are trillions of bacteria too. So you are a walking germ in many ways. And in fact, if you count the DNA from the germ on you, it's far more than the DNA in you. But that's the way God designed it. And he designed it so that they'll have these germs on you, and these germs are actually there to protect you. The healthcare workers who had less of the diversity, because guess what they were doing? Sanitizing all the time. Their hands carried more pathogens. Those are the disease-causing ones. So let me explain to you a little bit of how this works. It's called colonization resistance. So say on your hand here, there are trillions of viruses and bacteria, which there are. When the COVID comes to it and he tries to get a space in the colony, The colony is so full, the neighborhood is so full, they say, we don't want you, we just don't have space. And the hands protect you from disease. But because right now we're sanitizing ourselves to death, we're becoming like the healthcare workers, and our hands now are becoming which should be the first defense line, and it's the first part of the innate immunity that is there to protect us. It is now has lowered resistance, and we become more likely to be infected by COVID because of sanitization. Lockdowns and isolation, another thing to do with fear. But let me tell you something about lockdowns and isolation that many people don't know. And I'm just going to say it because I don't have time to put all of these things in slides. Just ask Google when I tell you. They found SARS-CoV-2 in wild deer. You heard it right. In wild deer. The deer they're not the deer in the zoo. They're the deer out in the wild. No, they don't have the normal coronavirus that we've had for years. They have the novel coronavirus. How in the world did the deer get it? Well, friends, there is no way to lock down or hide from a virus. In fact, humanity has never done this before. What happens is that humanity needs to learn how to live with COVID. COVID is not going anywhere. There is no way to kill coronavirus. There never was. Vaccines certainly don't kill them, and I think that should be established by now. And by the way, vaccines were never designed to kill germs, ever. In any case, that's another presentation. However, what we have to do is learn to live with the virus. So how do we do that? Well, we stop stressing, we make sure we get enough sleep, we stop using sugar, we hug our family and friends, not being afraid to them because hugs make us happy. And when we do this, what happens is that the virus spreads from one person to another, and the cases go up. So every time I see cases go up, I get happy, because cases go up does not mean that anything is wrong. If you hear of a death, that means that something is wrong. So let me explain. In my village where I came from, some of the COVID team came into my village, and they tested about 8 to 10 residents just randomly. And all 8 to 10 residents had, guess what? SARS-CoV-2. And so the report said, so many cases in region 10, found with this. What it failed to say, though, is that all 10 people that they tested, even though they tested positive for COVID SARS-2, had no symptoms, not at all. In fact, they were all playing cricket, going to the creek, just enjoying themselves. So because there's a rise in cases, it doesn't mean anything is wrong. It just means that that's 10 more people that just got natural immunity. But how things are being carried about now, it's very interesting. Never before have we said like 1,500 cases of HIV. There have been 1,000 more cases. I mean, when did that even become a thing in how we report disease? Unless someone was trying to make you afraid. And so I want you not to be afraid. Now let's talk about masks. How the world has responded to COVID. Now I've had a lot of people tell me, why don't you wear masks? If you're coming to visit somebody that has COVID, why don't you wear masks? I've had people tell me that it's not loving for you to not wear masks. I'm amazed at where this is going, all of these things. Friends, first of all, let me tell you that viruses in general, especially COVID virus, cannot be seen under an electron microscope, which is the smallest microscopes that we have in science at this time, even though we're trying to find smaller ones. If it cannot be seen under an electron microscope, that means it's smaller than a smoke particle. So here's the rule. If you can smell smoke through your mask, then your mask can't protect you from coronavirus. Just letting you know. So if you go near some smoke and you light a fire and you're smelling smoke through the mask, cannot protect you from COVID. The only mask that can possibly protect you from COVID would be hazmat masks that those guys wear when they're really dealing with certain things. And it's impossible improbable and just not realistic that the whole world is going to have those masks. There are other things about masks that we're going to talk about as we enter into more about how disease works. Remember I told you the disease is an effort of nature. So let me just erase this board and give you a lesson in immunity that somehow I can't say that the world has forgotten, because there are many doctors. So there are many doctors and scientists on both sides of the equation of what to do with this. But let me talk to you now about innate immunity and adaptive immunity. And both immunity systems operate in your body. The innate immunity has the skin with the microbiome and the sweat. The GI, gastrointestinal tract, has mucosa. It has gastric juices. And it has the hydrochloric acid of your system. The respiratory tract has cilia. It has mucosa. These are parts of your innate immunity, the first line of defense for any disease. In this case, we're talking about COVID. So when COVID comes to your skin, you have your microbiome protecting you. Your sweat also protects you. When COVID comes to your GI tract, you have your gastric juices, you have your hydrochloric acid. So if things come into your body through your mouth that your body doesn't want to do, it does several things. One of them is that it vomits it out. The other one is that it dilutes it and you get diarrhea so that the body can get rid of it. Now things going into your respiratory tract, let's say COVID, gets into your nostrils and it's going down. The cilia, which is like a hair-like structure on the endothelium wall of the respiratory tract, it starts sweeping the germ back up. And as it's sweeping the germ back up, it gives a ticklish kind of motion, and you either sneeze or you cough in order to get rid of the germ. But now we're coughing and we're sneezing into our masks and rebreathing them, reabsorbing them. This makes absolutely no sense. So now we're not being able to utilize our body's first line of defense. And this is putting the entire world at a disadvantage in dealing with COVID. Now, besides your first line of defense, over here you have phagocytes. And the phagocytes, macrophages, they eat germs. They'll sacrifice their lives to save you. You have a complement system, which includes the mast cells. And they're responsible for cytokines. And I know we've heard a lot about cytokines and the cytokine storm. And I'm going to try to explain that. Cytokines and an inflammatory cascade. That is all your body trying to do to help you to stay alive and to protect you from everything else. So with that system, if COVID comes in, and this is COVID because COVID has spikes, right? It's all about the spike protein. COVID has spikes. Then the macrophages sees them and they want to eat them. But as they're eating them and trying to consume them, the mast cells begin to produce cytokines. Cytokines and cytochemicals are chemicals that tells your other white blood cells that there's an enemy in the camp. That's what they're there for. And they begin an inflammatory cascade to find, destroy, and take out. Now, your adaptive immunity has T cells and B cells. B cells because they are made in the bone marrow. T cells because the B cells go into the thymus gland, and when they're mature, they come out as T cells. T helper cells do several things, and over here you also have your natural killer cells. I write them only because I mentioned them. Now, your B cells, they go around the body in the lymphatic tissue, in the lymphatic fluid, just looking for organisms that shouldn't be there. And then they find COVID. They say COVID shouldn't be there. And they see that the COVID spike protein is a match to their receptor antibody. And so it binds, this one binds to that one, and then this begins to produce antibodies and drops it into the blood system. And that works. B cells also produce memory cells. Memory cells. And so they forever remember what COVID looks like, and they'll always find it. Now, when these two systems work together, because this system is very specific because it utilizes memory cells. This system is not very specific. It deals with anything. So that if you get COVID and this entire thing happens for you, you'll be able to handle COVID SARS-2, the Delta version, the Lambda version, the Omega version, and all other versions. And you'll be able to handle them forevermore. Because if you know anything about disease and the immunity, if you had smallpox, never before would it tell you after you had smallpox that you needed to get a smallpox vaccine. This is weird that they're telling you after you would have had COVID to get the COVID vaccine. Because after you've had smallpox, you've already been exposed to the smallpox virus. And you already have antibodies. Your body has already had memory cells, and your innate immunity already knows to deal with anything that ever looks like smallpox that ever comes again. And this is the same system that's working with COVID. So it's interesting to me how the science is being skewed, at least in the media. And it shouldn't be, because reporters are not scientists. And governments and presidents are not scientists. We really should try to leave the science with the scientists at this point. So this is the entire thing that's happening with you. And if you've had COVID, like I said, the increase of cases, that means that we're gaining herd immunity. That's what herd immunity is. And this should be fine. But right now, we're forcing people that have had this happen to have vaccines. And just because I have to, let me just mention how vaccines work for just a moment. So first of all, let me let you know that vaccines do not use the innate immunity part of the immune system. So this part is completely canceled in the vaccine. The vaccine only uses the adaptive immunity. And remember, I told you that this is very specific. This will become important in just a moment. So the adaptive immunity, you get a vaccine, and the vaccine is an mRNA vaccine. That means it's a messenger. It's carrying a message. And the message that it carries to your cell tells your cell to produce this spike of the coronavirus. That's the first thing wrong. God never intended that a cell of the human body would produce any part of a virus. This is doing something that the body was not designed for. The farther you go away from the design, the more problems you will eventually have. It's just a law. If you try to jump off a building, you will fall down because gravity is just a law. So this is the first thing that's wrong with the vaccine. But in any case, this happens. So if you've taken the vaccine, you had one of your cells produce this spike protein from the COVID. And all this happens for you. This part happens for you. This part don't happen, this part don't happen, this part don't happen, but this part's happen. So your body found it. Your body created antibodies for this. However, remember I told you that this part is very specific. So because your body only has antibodies for this part, for this particular spike, when a new COVID virus comes out, and viruses always mutate, and Delta comes, and Lambda comes, and Omega comes, your body cannot and does not have the antibodies for this. It only has the antibodies for this. And so you need a booster shot, and another booster shot. And every time the virus mutates, you're going to need a new booster shot. And so I'm not anti-vax in terms that I've had my smallpox, rubella. I took the yellow fever vaccine when I was going over to Brazil in 2005. But this vaccine is doing something different. And so I am actually anti this vaccine, simply because it's doing something different. If you want me to get antibodies and work this system for a vaccine, inject me with the actual coronavirus. But there's a problem there, because in all of the journals that have produced data since the Wuhan experiment, not one of them have produced a purified version of the virus. There is no purified coronavirus. So they can't actually put the coronavirus in you. They don't have it, which is another thing for another time. But in any case, I hope you understood how the disease and what it's doing so that we can understand what treatment protocols to have. Now, the protocols that the world is using is based on antiviral therapy, immunomodulation therapy, antiplatelet, antithrombotic therapy, and then the administration of oxygen and monitoring of you. And so we're going to do the exact same thing, and they're using some of the antimalarials, they're using ivermectin, they're using hydrochloroquine, they're using steroids as immunoregulators. Was it remdesivir? They have a new thing that they're using, which is another problem because that has its own problems. All drugs have side effects. So we want to know what we can use naturally that will do the same thing. And in Guyana, we should be pretty open to natural because we've been using natural all years of our lives, right? So let's get into some of the science. The first thing that we can know is that the studies have shown that Artemisia annua kills COVID. Artemisia annua is also known as wormwood. And that was 75% of the tea that the Tasmanian president was using because they were selling like this COVID tea all over Africa. And that was 75% of what was in it. NIGELA sativa. So they've looked at the thymoquinone, which is in NIGELA, which is black seed. And they found that it has all sorts of properties in terms of antiviral, anti-inflammatory, immunomodulatory. So it's doing the very same things that the steroids and the antivirals and the hydrochloroquine is doing the very same things that would do. Then we have more information coming about from elderberry and COVID. And again, elderberry is anti-COVID. And there's a lot of things that are anti-COVID. And you can check them out. And I really can't tell you all of them right now, but it's a lot. Charcoal was an interesting development because what they found is that charcoal absorbs the virus. And so it reduces the viral load. So it shortens the time that you have COVID for because you have less to fight off. It also helps to absorb cytokines. And so it helps with the cytokine storm. And let me just explain for a moment how the cytokine storm works. So let me erase this so that you can have a little bit of understanding, so that when I talk about cytokine, you can understand. So this is the lungs. The lungs have these alveoli, and I'm just putting a lot of them. Alveoli are incredibly thin-walled sacs, and they facilitate the exchange of oxygen to hemoglobin in the blood as the blood runs through this. Now, on here, there's something called ACE inhibitors. I don't want to say ACE receptors, sorry, not inhibitors. ACE receptors. And on these ACE receptors, COVID likes them. And so COVID binds to these receptors in the alveoli. Now, when COVID binds to these receptors, your immune system, your innate immune system and your adaptive immune system kick in. Now, when they kick in, they release a whole bunch of cytokines, which are chemicals, so they're everywhere. And the chemicals are there so that your white blood cells can start coming into this area to kill, to fix, to eat, to get rid of. Now, as they're doing that, this whole area becomes a war zone. When this area becomes a war zone, because of the oxidation that is going on, these alveoli cell walls begin to have a little bit of porousness. They become porous because it's just a lot of war, you know. It's a lot of fighting. When they become porous, debris starts settling in here. The mucosa tries to trap the COVID in the mucus, and you end up with pneumonia. And charcoal helps to absorb some of these cytokines so that it can tell all the warriors, take it easy. You're fighting, but we don't want all of you throwing bombs and grenades and bullets, because you're not only going to kill COVID, you're going to hurt me too. And so it's helpful for absorbing some of the cytokines. Vitamin D. Vitamin D does a lot of things, but one of the things that it was being used for before the vaccines came about is that it was being used by doctors to treat COVID, and it's been working successfully. The sun kills viruses. We've always known this, and in fact, during the 1918 flu pandemic, where the army hospitals were some of the best places that you could go to be treated, they were putting you in the sun. The only place that beat them, they had about a 6.3% death rate. The sanitariums had about a 1.6% death rate. And that's because the sanitariums were preventing this stage. You want to prevent pneumonia with COVID. I've had in my life these alveoli flood my left lung to about 3/4 of the way, and my right lung about half of the way. I know what it's like to be drowning in your own fluids. It's not pleasant, and you really want to prevent that from happening. If it goes to that, it becomes harder to treat. Not impossible, but much harder. So we want to prevent it by doing some of these things as soon as we have symptoms. Supplements, I can't go through all of them or tell you all of them, but zinc, iodine kills COVID on contact. Zinc lozenges, povidone iodine mouthwashes they're using now. Probiotics, I'm going to tell you, use probiotics because if your gut microbiome isn't well, your immunity cannot be well. It just doesn't work that way. Vitamin C, echinacea, golden seal, garlic extracts. Turmeric, anti-inflammatory, NAC, N-acetylcysteine. Right now, you can't find that easily, and I've had some people call me telling me, do you know anywhere that we can get it? Because it's been proven that it is extremely beneficial to inflammation of the lungs. But right now, for some reason, it's not being on the market, or maybe people just bought it out. I'm not sure. Magnesium citrate, elderberry, green juices, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Aloe vera kills COVID. Ask Google. I don't have time to share that with you. Pineapple, bromelain. The bromelain in pineapple is extremely helpful to anyone that has lung trouble. Colloidal silver will kill anything, so why not? Let food be your medicine. Dr. T. Colin Campbell again. I talked about him because of scientists. He is renowned for being the one that has done the largest based randomized study in the world. And the China study was recommended to medical students all over the world as a book that they should read and must read. And he's come out stating that we could change the COVID game if we simply went on a plant-based whole foods diet. He says this based on his studies when he was going around in Taiwan and China, where he saw hepatitis. And when he saw hepatitis, which is a viral infection, he saw that the antibodies in those on a plant-based whole foods diet increased by 50% as compared with those who were eating just whatever. And so it leaves room to think that maybe indeed food could be our medicine, and maybe what's going on makes sense. Now, if you look at the slide in front of you, with the plant chlorophyll and the human blood cell, you're going to see that the only difference between those cells is that one has magnesium and the other one has iron in the center. So plant cells can help blood cells. What causes low oxygen saturation? What happens when you can't breathe well? You're not getting enough oxygen. Why aren't you getting enough oxygen? One, your blood is not circulating properly, and that's because usually you're not moving. So for those that are on COVID, that have COVID that are not moving, they're lying in a chair or something, you need to move them. So grab an arm, I'm not kidding, grab an arm, move it like this, ask them to, it's called isometric exercises. Ask them to push against you when you push, ask them to pull back against you when you pull. Do it to both hands, do it to both feet. They need to move so that the circulatory system can move better, and so that the lymphatic system, which doesn't have a pump, can move. Because the lymphatic system is the system that's going to be cleaning up the war. And if you don't move, the lymphatic system becomes sluggish, and it can't clean up the war as well as it could. The other thing that makes you not have good breathing, and you start to feel a little bit woozy, a little bit dizzy, and maybe a little bit confused, low oxygen again. The blood is not being able to carry the oxygen as it should. You want to increase blood flow, and you want to increase the carrying capacity of the blood, because there's a biblical principle that says the life is in the blood. Good circulation equals good health. And so in order to do this, one of the best ways actually is to juice, to get fruits and vegetables and to juice them and to drink them. Because as you can see, the more juices you drink, the more greens you drink, the better will be the blood, as can be seen in the very cells of the thing. Boosters. Well, I'm just going to let the slide speak for itself. If you do this, this is one of the things that I usually suggest to everybody dealing with all lung trouble. It works very well. It tastes nasty, but it works well. Russian penicillin, do that too. That will help with lung inflammation and help with COVID and help with the troubles that people usually have. Try that. Help you breathe easy. If you have COVID or if you have any lung trouble, please do not lie on your stomach. There's something called proning, and it's being practiced right now in India in all their hospitals where they're dealing with COVID. And basically it means that if you have COVID, don't lie down on your back. Lie down on your stomach. I think I said that wrong before. So you want to lie on your stomach and not on your back. The reason for this is because when you lie on your back, the alveoli have more pressure on them. So it's pushing on them and making them smaller when you lie on your back. And this makes not only the oxygen transfer harder, but it makes the congestion of the lungs more. And so you want to lie on your belly or on your side. Postural drainage, I don't have time to talk about that. Please ask Google. Salves, fomentations, things like that you can put on your chest. Belly breathing. So please breathe from your belly and not from your chest. I know usually when people say take a deep breath, we do as if somehow our shoulders are involved in breathing. They aren't really. So if you see a baby sleeping, you'll see that the baby's belly goes in and out. That's what you want to do. And you want to do what's best is 4-7-9. So let me demonstrate. You put your hands on your belly to make sure your belly is moving. You breathe in for 4. You hold it for 7. And then you breathe out of your mouth for 9. It's over breathing, but what it'll do when you finish that, you'll take another breath in just automatically, and it will help you. Part of the protocol that we do. Next thing that I had to write here is don't panic. The whole world's in a panic. God would have us not. He said He has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. Get out of your house. Forget isolation. Forget quarantining. Get out of your house. If you want to know where germs grow, lock a house from the air and from the sunshine and see how quickly germs will grow inside. In order to get rid of germs, you need light, you need air. So go outside, exercise, move. Move as far as much as you can. And take some of these things. Some of these herbs are very good for oxygen, increasing oxygen capacity. Ginseng, gotu kola, cayenne pepper, bird pepper. Cayenne pepper is bird pepper, so try that. Water treatments, as we're coming to the end of this presentation. So there are several water treatments that you can do. What you need to do, the first one that I would advise you to do is hot and cold to both front and back of the chest. I'm not sure if you can ask Google all together how to do this. But you want to do hot, 3 minutes. Then you want to do cold, 30 seconds. And then you want to do hot, then you want to do cold 7 times. So 7 repetitions in the front, 7 repetitions in the back. It's best if you do them together. And then you can do it 2-3 times a day. For someone with a lot of congestion, it will help. There are several other things here. The hot foot bath. So you put water in a little basin, put the feet inside of it, let it cover the ankles, and slowly add a little bit more hot water, and a little bit more hot water, a little bit more hot water, a little bit more hot water until it's nice, really hot. And what that does is that it moves congestion. So there's a law that the blood will take things to the area that is most hot. And so if your lungs are congested, the blood is going to move from your lungs to your feet. And so it will move congestion. You can do inhalation, which is what the man is doing on the screen with the towel over his head. So you get some hot water and you put in some peppermint oil or some eucalyptus oil and you just breathe that in. That'll open up your sinuses if they're closed. Finally, God says He pitied and loved, this is speaking of Jesus, not only those who sought to be obedient and loving, but those also who were wayward and perverse. Jesus has not changed. So you want to remember in this time of relative chaos, really. So first, love everybody. So whether they're for the vaccine or they're anti-vaccine, I'm pro-freedom. So if you want a vaccine, if you don't want a vaccine, both of you can eat at my table. If you have COVID and if you don't have COVID, both of you can eat at my table. I'm hugging my family and friends and I'm living because the virus is surely living. And I don't know why humanity should die. So let's all keep living. Remember that the Lord loves all. He wants us to love all. And He wants us to represent Him. Our immune system is there. The Bible says when the enemy comes in, the Lord will raise up a standard against him. Our standard is our immunity. And as long as we are eating, living, handling stress, getting enough sleep, not doing overly sugary diets, our immune systems are going to be strong enough to handle COVID, SARS-2, the Delta, the Omega, and whatever other viruses that come along. God will raise up a standard against it. So may the Lord bless you as we, as a world really, continue to deal with COVID. And may the Lord strengthen you to do that which is wise and good.